Okay, so have you ever like felt kind of stuck with like understanding English? You know,
Yeah.
you've studied, you got all this vocabulary, but then somebody starts talking and you're like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah, it's so frustrating. You feel like you're missing something.
Right. And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today, how to understand fast English. We've got some really cool tips from this English tutor on YouTube, Miss Jean.
Yeah, she's awesome. She helps people not only understand spoken English, but she helps people sound more natural when they actually speak.
Totally. And she's got some great insights. So let's jump right into her first tip, connected speech. And this isn't just people being lazy, it's actually like a real thing in languages.
Yeah, it's a universal feature of how we speak. Basically, sounds change and they blend together to make it smoother.
And she has this great example, did you eat yet? But when a native speaker says it, it often sounds more like, did ye eat it?
Right, because the sounds kind of like affect each other. So the D at the end of deed and the Y at the beginning of you are both voiced sounds, meaning your vocal cords are vibrating when you make them. So they naturally just sort of blend together into that J sound.
That's so interesting.
And then there's that T at the end of eat. You know, in casual speech, it often turns into what we call a glottal stop. It's kind of like a little closure of your vocal cords.
Oh, okay. So that's what's happening. So knowing these patterns can really help us understand what sounds like a jumble at first.
Absolutely. And Miss Jean has a lot of examples on her channel, which is great for getting your ear used to it. But let's move on to her next tip, which is the power of stressed words.
This one is all about rhythm, right? Because English is what we call a stress-timed language. Some words get emphasized more than others.
Exactly. It's like the beat of the language.
Yeah, like if you think of the phrase, I'm going to the store, the words going and store have more emphasis. I'm to and the are kind of quieter.
And what's really cool is that the stressed words often are the most important for understanding the meaning. So even if you don't get every single word, you can get the main idea.
Oh, so our brains are actually like picking out the important parts,
Yeah.
even when it's fast.
Exactly. And this is key for understanding fast English. Focusing on stressed words helps you tune out the noise and focus on the important stuff.
That's so helpful. Now, Miss Jean's next tip kind of builds on that, right? It's about using context clues.
Yes. This is where we look beyond the individual words and think about the big picture, like body language, facial expressions, the overall situation, all those things help us understand.
I mean, think about it. How many times do you understand someone even if you don't get all the words? We do it all the time.
Yeah, our brains are really good at filling in the gaps.
So when you're listening to fast English, don't get stuck on every single word. Pay attention to how they're saying it, their body language, what's going on around them. Those can give you a lot of information.
It's like you become a detective of meaning, you know?
I like that. And this detective work gets even better with her next technique, which is shadowing.
Ah, shadowing. It's all about mimicking. It's like you're trying to become a native speaker for a minute.
You listen to a phrase and then you repeat it, trying to copy their pronunciation, how their voice goes up and down, even how fast they talk.
It's like vocal boot camp, you know?
It sounds intense, but also really effective.
It is. And it's not just about pronunciation, it's about feeling that natural rhythm of English.
Like learning to dance to the music of the language.
Exactly. As you practice, you'll notice things like how native speakers connect words, how they stress certain sounds.
So you're like unlocking their secrets.
Yeah, exactly. Speaking of secrets, Miss Jean also talks about collocations, basically, words that always go together.
Oh, right. This is where English gets weird, right?
For sure. We say things like make the bed, but do the dishes. Why not do the bed? It's just how it is.
It's like a secret code.
And what's cool is that collocations help you guess what word might come next. Even if it's fast, you hear make, you might think bed is coming. It makes it less overwhelming.
It's like having a cheat sheet. But it's not all just tricks, right? Miss Jean also says we need to listen to lots of different accents.
Yeah, even within American English, there are so many different accents.
It's true. Like Boston sounds different from Texas, even though it's all English.
And then you have all the other accents, like British, Australian.
So how do we keep up with all that?
Miss Jean says, listen to as much variety as you can.
Podcasts, movies, even just talking to people with different accents.
Exactly. It's like giving your ears a workout.
I love that. And the more we train our ears, the easier it is to understand, right?
Exactly. Now, if you're feeling really ambitious, Miss Jean has another tip, and it's dictation.
Dictation, like in school.
It might sound old-fashioned, but it helps train your ear to catch those little sounds that get lost in fast speech.
So how does it work?
You listen to something, maybe a sentence or two, and you try to write down everything you hear.
Oh, wow. So you have to pay really close attention.
She recommends using movies with subtitles for this.
Okay, that sounds more fun.
It is. Pause after each sentence, write down what you hear, and check it with the subtitle.
And by seeing what you miss, you know what to work on.
Exactly. But don't go too crazy.
Right. Miss Jean also says not to try all these things at once.
It's better to build good habits over time.
Small steps every day.
Exactly. So start small and make these things a part of your English routine.
It's about making it a natural part of how we learn.
And speaking of natural, let's talk about repetition and practicing every day.
These are like the keys to learning anything, right? And understanding fast English is no different.
It's just like going to the gym. You don't start lifting the heaviest weights right away, right? You start small and build up.
Exactly. And consistency is everything. Even if it's just 15 minutes a day, make it a habit to listen to some English. A podcast, a song, anything.
And don't be afraid to listen to things multiple times. The first time, you might only catch the main idea. But each time you listen, you'll hear more and more details.
It's like those pictures where you see one thing at first, but then you see something else hidden. The more you look, the more you see.
That's a great way to put it. The same thing happens with listening. You start to notice things you didn't hear before.
It's like our brains are figuring out the code of fast English.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the faster you'll crack that code.
This is awesome. I feel like we're giving our listeners the tools they need to really understand fast English. But before we get too excited, we have to take a quick break. We'll be back in a minute.
So we were talking about repetition, right? And how listening to the same thing a few times can really help us understand fast English better.
It's amazing how much you miss the first time around. But when you go back and listen again, it's like, oh, now I hear those words.
Totally. It's like putting a puzzle together. You get more pieces each time.
I like that. So for anyone listening who's feeling overwhelmed by fast English, just remember, it takes time. Be patient with yourself.
Yeah, you don't become fluent overnight. It's a process.
Speaking of fluency, what does it actually mean to understand fast English like a native speaker?
It's not just about knowing all the words, right? It's about really getting what they mean, how they're used, the feeling behind them.
Yeah, it's about being able to follow a conversation, understanding jokes, even feeling the emotions.
It's almost like you become fluent in the music of the language. The rhythm, the intonation, it all adds to the meaning.
Okay, so how do we get to that level?
Well, it builds on what we talked about, but it also means really immersing yourself in the language.
Surrounding yourself with English, right? Movies, podcasts, music, talking to people.
All of it. And don't be afraid to challenge yourself. Try listening to things that are a little bit faster than you're comfortable with.
So push yourself a little.
Yeah, you got to stretch those listening muscles. And what seemed impossible before might start to sound more normal.
Like training for a marathon. You start small and build up your endurance.
Exactly. Make it a habit. Even just a little bit of English every day helps.
But it's not just about listening passively, right? We should be actively trying to understand.
Absolutely. Take notes, look up words you don't know, maybe try to summarize what you heard.
Like make it an active process.
Yeah, be involved. The more you do that, the faster you'll progress.
So for everyone working on their listening skills, know that it's not always going to be easy. You might get frustrated sometimes.
It's okay to feel that way, but don't give up. It's worth it.
Just think about being able to watch your favorite movies without subtitles.
Or having a conversation with a native speaker and not feeling lost.
That would be amazing.
It really opens up a whole new world when you can understand fast English.
Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we continue. Let's talk about some more specific things we can do to improve our listening.
One really powerful technique is called active listening. It's all about being present, fully focused on what you're hearing.
Not just having it on in the background while you're doing other stuff.
Right. It's about really paying attention to the words, the tone of voice, even the body language if you can see the person.
Giving your brain a workout.
Yes. And to make it even more effective, try setting a goal for yourself before you listen.
Like, what do you want to get out of it?
Exactly. For example, let's say you're listening to a podcast about history. Your goal could be to learn 3 new facts.
Or if you're watching a movie, maybe pay attention to how the characters are related and how those relationships change.
Having that goal helps you focus, and it makes your brain work harder to understand.
Makes sense. Another thing that can help is to break down long audio into smaller pieces.
Especially if you're just starting out, it can be less overwhelming that way.
So instead of trying to listen to a whole hour-long podcast, maybe break it up into 15-minute chunks.
Yeah, and during each chunk, Really try to understand the main points. Take notes. Then you can take a break, review, think about what you learned.
Makes it easier to digest, so to speak.
Exactly. And speaking of digestion, let's talk about vocabulary.
Ah, yes, vocabulary. The building blocks of any language.
Having a good vocabulary is super important for understanding, especially when things are spoken quickly.
Because if you don't know the words, it doesn't matter how slow they talk.
Exactly. So how do we build our vocabulary? Well, one of the best ways is to learn words in context.
So see how they're actually used in real situations, like when you're reading or listening to something.
And it's not just about memorizing a definition. It's about understanding how a word is used, all the different shades of meaning.
Because one word can mean different things depending on how it's used, right?
Exactly. So when you come across a word you don't know, look it up, try to use it in a sentence yourself.
And don't worry too much about making mistakes. Just try it out.
The more you use new words, the more comfortable you'll get with them.
And the more you understand.
It's all connected. But we'll have to pause our vocabulary discussion for now. We'll be right back with the final part of our deep dive.
All right, we're back. And we were just getting into vocabulary, right? How knowing more words can really help you keep up with fast English.
It's true, but it's not just about the number of words you know. It's also about understanding, like, the little differences in how they're used.
Right, like the subtleties.
Yeah, it's like, when you first start learning a language, it can feel like everything is black and white. But as you learn more, you start to see all the shades of gray, all the different ways a word can be used.
And that makes such a big difference.
Huge. So as you're building your vocabulary, don't just focus on memorizing definitions. Pay attention to how those words are actually used in real life situations. Like read a lot, listen to a lot, and try to use the words yourself.
Play around with them. Experiment.
Exactly. And speaking of playing around, one of the most fun skills you can develop for understanding fast English is the ability to kind of predict what's coming next.
Ooh, predict. Like, guess what the speaker is going to say?
Kind of. You use your knowledge of grammar, vocabulary, and the context to make educated guesses.
So it's more than just reacting to what you hear. You're kind of anticipating it.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the easier it gets to follow along with fast speech. It's almost like you're reading the speaker's mind a little bit.
Okay, that sounds cool. How can we get better at predicting?
Pay close attention to the little cues that speakers give you. Things like pauses, the way their voice goes up and down, even their body language if you can see them.
It's like a secret language.
Yeah, it is. And the more you understand that secret language, the better you'll be at understanding the whole message, not just the words themselves.
I'm really loving all these tips. It feels like we're giving everyone a whole new way to approach fast English.
I hope so. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to emphasize one more time. Don't be afraid to challenge yourself.
I know it can be intimidating, but like you said earlier, understanding fast English is a skill. We can learn it. It just takes practice.
Think about how rewarding it will be when you can understand your favorite movies without subtitles.
Oh, yeah.
Or when you can have a natural, flowing conversation with a native speaker and feel totally confident.
It opens so many doors.
So keep practicing, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep believing in yourself.
That's a perfect way to end our deep dive. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Remember, learning a language is a journey, and it's a journey worth taking. Happy listening.